Hello, everyone. I'm Tanya Rivero. Thank you for joining us. President Donald Trump today is claiming no one has been tougher on Russia than him, one day after saying he misspoke at his press conference Monday with Vladimir Putin. At that summit, the president initially said he didn't see why Russia would interfere in the 2016 election. But then yesterday, he said he meant, quote, "I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be Russia." He also told reporters he does have faith in U.S. intelligence. But this morning, in a series of tweets, the president defended his Helsinki meeting. He says he and Putin discussed many important subjects. The meeting was a success and that Russia has agreed to help with North Korea. The president also had this to add in his cabinet meeting earlier.
And we're doing very well, probably as well as anybody has ever done with Russia. And there's been no president ever as tough as I have been on Russia. All you have to do is look at the numbers, look at what we've done, look at sanctions, look at ambassadors not there, look, unfortunately, at what happened in Syria recently. And I think President Putin knows that better than anybody, certainly a lot better than the media. He understands it, and he's not happy about it. And he shouldn't be happy about it, because there's never been a president as tough on Russia as I have been.
And joining me now is Gabe Debenedetti. He's a national correspondent for New York Magazine. Gabe, great to have you here again. First of all, I want your reaction to President Trump's comment there that no one has been as tough on Russia, or no other president has been as tough on Russia as President Trump.
He keeps saying that, but really it's just words. Presumably he's referring to so-called tough talk with Putin behind closed doors. We don't actually know if that actually happened. And sanctions that, in fact, Congress has put in place on Russia, in which the president only reluctantly actually decided to sign off on. So it's not really based in reality. Certainly we've had other presidents who've been tougher on Russia, for example, during the entire Cold War. But that's just the beginning of this. This is just a line he likes to repeat. Even Vladimir Putin thinks that's not true.
Does it sometimes appear that he's even adopting some of Russia's own messaging on certain topics?
Yes, absolutely. And there were moments in the actual press conference with Putin the other day where it seemed as if Putin actually had to come in and say, well, you know, Trump obviously does agree with the U.S. consensus on this. You know, we don't agree on everything, but there are some things. For example, earlier today, he said that he was asked if Russia is still targeting the United States right now. And he said no. That, of course, goes against the entire intelligence community's conclusions, but it's exactly what Russia's been saying.
Right. And of course, we don't have access to the intelligence of these organizations. That's classified. But we do know from a lot of tech reporters that they've confirmed that the ongoing efforts of Russians to infiltrate social media, to influence, continues.
Well, And not just that, you've had people at the highest levels of the intelligence community, including the Secretary of State, the Director of National Intelligence, and others say repeatedly Russia will be back. In fact, Russia already is back in 2018.
All right. So what are you seeing from other Republican lawmakers? Do you think that they have now, they were willing to accept President Trump's walk back? Where do they stand now?
I think a lot of them are essentially saying, I've got other things to worry about. Don't bother me with this stuff. Right. It's the same sort of thing that Democrats have become very discouraged about. That this is just yet another example of Republicans sort of saying, yeah, don't ask me about that stuff. A walk back to a walk back to a walk back. I can't keep it straight. They're avoiding actually answering the question.
And I want to play a little bit of what Kellyanne Conway said about it this morning.
Why aren't you covering everything that actually matters between Russia and the U.S.? Excuse me, there's more than election meddling.
So she says, why aren't you covering other things? There's more than election meddling, but we're getting very little information about what actually transpired between President Trump and Putin.
Yeah, that's exactly why people aren't covering anything else, which of course they are doing. But one, election meddling, I'd say, is pretty important. And two, the fact remains that President Putin and President Trump met for 2 hours behind closed doors, and no one knows what was said. And now you have Russia saying they're ready to act on the agreements.
Exactly. So the Russian embassy says we're ready to implement some of these things that we've discussed. Why does the Kremlin have more sort of a more open press policy at this point than the White House seems to?
Listen, it's entirely possible that this is all a strategy from the White House to essentially say, you know, keep this behind closed doors and say we came up with some agreements, but it's not in our interest to actually come out and publicly say what they are right now.
Right.
But it does seem that at least in the court of public opinion, the Kremlin is really playing the United States right now by getting out in front of them.
Absolutely. So I also want to play a little bit of an interview between Tucker Carlson and President Trump earlier. Listen to this.
Membership in NATO obligates the members to defend any other member that's attacked. So let's say Montenegro, which joined last year, is attacked.
Right.
Why should my son go to Montenegro to defend it from attack? Why is that?
I understand what you're saying. I've asked the same question. You know, Montenegro is a tiny country with very strong people.
Yeah, I'm not against Montenegro
Right.
or Albania.
No, by the way, they're very strong people. They're very aggressive people. They may get aggressive, and congratulations, you're in World War III. Now, I understand that, but that's the way it was set up.
So he almost appeared to throw Montenegro under the bus, but then pulled back a little bit and said, but hey, that's just the way NATO is set up. But still, if you live in Montenegro, are you worried?
Well, yeah, absolutely. But not just in Montenegro. I mean, it's sort of bizarre that Montenegro specifically was singled out there when, in fact, Montenegro, a tiny country, has come to the United States' support in the past. But the reality here is that what the president is talking about is an overall problem that he has with this piece of NATO that essentially says if one country is attacked, the others are going to come to its defense.
Right.
The reality, though, is that one, the only time that has really come into play was to the United States' defense, and other countries did, in fact, defend the United States. And two, NATO really ceases to exist without the idea of mutual defense, which is Article 5, which he has questioned in the past. So this is really something that makes people across the world extremely unsafe. They don't feel very good about this, but no one has really been able to get much clarity about whether the president wants to change anything or whether this is just some sort of tough talk.
And we know how important also NATO is to the Baltic states. I mean, just having a presence there is reassuring to them. So hopefully
Absolutely.
that will remain. All right. So lastly, President Obama gave a major speech yesterday to mark Nelson Mandela's 100th birthday. I want to play a little bit of that.
We now stand at a crossroads. A moment in time at which two very different visions of humanity's future compete for the hearts and the minds of citizens around the world. Two different stories, two different narratives about who we are and who we should be.
So, of course, you recently wrote a deep dive into what President Obama has been doing, former President Obama has been doing. We haven't heard from him until pretty recently a lot. Do you think we're going to be hearing from him more?
He certainly said that he's going to be on the campaign trail more, but what you saw in this big speech in Johannesburg is pretty typical of what it's been like when he does speak out, which is he's obviously sending some sort of message about what's going on with President Trump, but he doesn't mention the president by name, certainly doesn't go after him in any direct way, and instead talks about the way things should be. He talks about political ideals and the dangers, of course, of having politicians who lie or who double down on their lies without evidence. These are all principles that President Obama has talked about for really a decade in the public eye, but I don't think we should expect to all of a sudden see him going after Trump directly. That doesn't mean that once he does start hitting the campaign trail, he won't go after other Republicans, but don't expect him to start talking about Trump and Putin anytime soon.
He doesn't talk about them directly, though, but it's pretty clear what he's referring to.
Absolutely. And one of the things that a lot of people close to Obama frequently say is that he really does feel strongly that it's important for one president to give the other president some space, even if they disagree with absolutely everything that that person is doing. He looks back on the example of his own early presidency when George W. Bush didn't say a word, even though a lot of what Obama did was really dedicated to rolling back the Bush platform. Now, he sees in many ways, obviously, Trump is very dangerous to the United States, but he does feel that unless it's an extreme situation, he can't go out there and break this precedent because, in the end, the peaceful transfer of power is one of the most important pieces of our democracy.
Absolutely. Gabe Debenedetti, thank you so much for your insight.